My name is Vern Gagne. Wrestling was my love, and it was very good to me for a long time. At the AWA, which I was lucky enough to run, a lot of others did well too. Some of them you already know, others you might have heard of, others may have been forgotten until now. This is the story of the AWA, one of the greatest wrestling organizations ever. Some say it was good, others say it was great. I say it was spectacular.
In the 1930s and 1940s, wrestling became very fragmented. There were regions all around the country, 6 or 7, and they had their individual hierarchies and their promoters. And of course, the best way to get a good crowd is to have the World Heavyweight Champion appearing. Well, the World Heavyweight Champion can only be spread so thin. So a lot of the promoters came up with their own version of the World Heavyweight Champion. I understand that the promoters got together in 1947 in Waterloo, Iowa, and formed the National Wrestling Alliance.
The NWA was basically a cooperative of wrestling promoters that agreed to get along and not infringe on each other's territory, to share talent, and to recognize one champion.
And then this group of promoters, 5 or 6, became the controlling body, and to ensure that they had a very healthy organization. And I think it worked pretty well for a while.
Well, I was born out at a little farm near Corcoran, Minnesota, and I was born in 1926. Wrestling was kind of in my blood.
He would sit on his grandfather's lap when he was about 5 years old, and they'd listen to it on the radio. And he told his grandfather at that time, "I want to be a professional wrestler."
Well, high school, I won the state wrestling championship all 3 years that I wrestled in it, and was all state in football. And when I was 18 years old, and I got drafted into the service, I'm in the Marine Corps. And I was in the Marines for 2 years and about 3-4 months. And then I won the Big Ten when I got into college. I won all 4 years. And I won the NCAAs. I was in 3 of those, and I won 2 of them. I also won the National AAU Championship in wrestling. I went to the Olympics in 1948. We had 2 teams, freestyle team and a Greco-Roman team. I was on the Greco-Roman team. When the time came up for us to go into the tournament, the night before we went in, our coaches came to us and said, "We got some tough problem for you guys," and they said, "We're not going to let you wrestle, because we don't think you guys know enough about Greco-Roman wrestling." And we were very disappointed and angry and all that kind of thing, because we had trained for 3 months.
After college, was signed by the Green Bay Packers to play football. Made the team, but his salary was $5,000 a year. And they traded his rights to the Chicago Bears. And George Halas, at that time the owner of the Bears, didn't want him to both wrestle and play football. And he decided that wrestling is the direction he wanted to go. That was his dream, and made a whole lot more money wrestling than he ever would have playing pro football.
And Tony Stecker was the promoter of wrestling, professional wrestling here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities here in Minneapolis. And so I trained for that with some of the pro wrestlers who had been amateur wrestlers at the university, and they taught me the difference and that sort of thing. So I wrestled out of here for a while, and then they wanted me to come down to Oklahoma, where the weights were lighter down there.
And became the junior heavyweight champion, NWA junior heavyweight champion at that time. And that was up until about 1952. From 49 to 52 then, we were on the road. I was born in 1948, and we lived in a trailer. And we lived from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Houston, Texas, and moved around in that trailer, and he wrestled in that area until 1952, and then he came back to Chicago.
Chicago, they were on the Dumont Network with the wrestling on Saturday nights, and 2 hours. And they wanted to come up there and wrestle. So I did, and it was a great move for them once the whole country would see on a Saturday night.
In the 1950s, there was a new phenomenon that changed all of America's entertainment habits. It's called television. To me, Verne Gagne was a bigger star than Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays, and as big as Rocky Marciano. They would watch this on a Saturday night. And these guys were like rock stars today. When Verne Gagne and Lou Thesz came to your city to compete on a Saturday night, wow, I just saw these guys on TV 2 weeks ago. That was big, big stuff. It was like a movie star. It was like John Wayne and Cary Grant coming to your local theater.
He was the Hulk Hogan of that day. Network TV started in 1952. He was on it. He became a huge star. He was on the Art Linkletter Show, Arthur Godfrey Show, Steve Allen, The Tonight Show. He was on that, did commercials. He was the only wrestler to really step out of the wrestling realm at that time and get the endorsements that wrestlers never got before.
Jack Brickhouse, the noted baseball announcer who did wrestling in the 50s, said Verne Gagne was as big, if not bigger, than any Chicago Bear, White Sox, or Cub player in Chicago. And yet Verne, the one thing he wants to feel fulfilled, he's making tremendous money. He's a big hero to millions of kids. He's getting TV exposure. He's doing very well. But what's any athlete want? If you're an amateur, you want to be an Olympic champion. If you're a professional, you want to be the heavyweight champion of the world. And for whatever reason, Verne wasn't given that opportunity.
Well, Lou Thesz was the champion, and I wrestled him 3 times. We had 2 draws, and the third one, he got disqualified. Then I couldn't get another match with him. Last time I wrestled him, I said, the next time we wrestle, I will beat you. I never got him to wrestle after that.
I understand that the NW promoters, more than Lou, wanted to keep control of the title through Lou. And that there was a promoter out of Chicago named Fred Kohler, who was a big Verne Gagne fan, and he wanted Verne to have a chance to be the NWA champion, but some of the other promoters felt that if Verne was the champion, the NWA champion, that Fred Kohler would be able to control him and get him to the Chicago area, and they'd be left out in the cold. So the NWA promoters, in my understanding, weren't interested in Verne becoming the champion.
The promoters gave the NWA an ultimatum, either meet or we're going to break off on our own.
That was the end of he wouldn't wrestle any. So we decided to get into the promotion here. I bought the Steckers out.
Verne and another person by the name of Wally Carbo formed a group and decided to purchase the territory.
I was now running the AWA and also was wrestling at the same time.
It was big for anybody to break away from the NWA at that time. They were a pretty cohesive group. I believe shortly after that, the WWF broke away and formed their group on the East Coast. So it was monumental. I mean, it was huge. And that's when you ended up with basically your 3 champions, your 3 world champions. You had the NWA, AWA, and the WWF at that time. It was huge, and it was a big breakaway from the control of the NWA.
Verne saw a grand opportunity. He was a good promoter. He saw the opportunity to not only enhance his own reputation as a sports superstar, which he should do, but also to saw his ability to make a lot of money and bring other people into the fold.
It was called Minneapolis Boxing and Wrestling at that time. They ran on Tuesday nights. They drew anywhere from 400 to 600 people, so it wasn't huge. He became partners with Wally Carbo. His role was to expand and build the Minneapolis area.
And there was more energy and more enthusiasm on their part just as when Vince Jr. took over from his dad.
He knew that to be successful, you had to have television. You can't sell wrestling in newspapers and radios. You need television. Vern understood television. He understood promotions.
We drew a lot of money because of the television, and I think that was the biggest thing that helped the AWA. And Vern did get out and promote that end of the business.
He got on TV in Minneapolis, expanded into Milwaukee, Green Bay, Chicago, Winnipeg, Canada, Omaha, Nebraska, Denver, Colorado, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Las Vegas, San Francisco. He's the one that went out and acquired the TV time slots for him. He was the figurehead.
Operate a little bit differently than what Wally did, but Wally was the backbone. Wally kind of worked pretty close with all the wrestlers. They all loved Wally.
Wally was a hell of a nice guy, and I think he kind of kept the threads together.
Wally was great at kind of smoothing things over.
Vern Gagne, the owner of the AWA, ran a tight ship.
Vern was tough to work for. It was tough to understand some of his psychology about wrestling and promotion.
You know, he was a perfectionist. Everything done the way he visualized wrestling should be done.
He was very deliberate, very measured. He is a wrestling purist.
When you're dealing with that individual who has a fairly large ego, which you have to have, I found him sometimes hard to deal with, but you know, in this business, a lot of the promoters were hard to deal with.
He's extremely opinionated. He just has no time for someone that isn't on their game, you know, and he ran his company that way. Dad ran Florida that way.
All of the territorials, if you will, around the country were run with the same concept. Protect the business. The business is like a family business. It's almost like the mafia was. Nobody came in, nobody went out.
Keeping the heels and baby faces separated at all times, at any cost.
If they were booked in Chicago, the adversaries would stay at separate hotels, mandatorily. If they didn't, they would be fined or fired.
I just wanted to do what I knew was right and the way to do it.
The first champion of the AWA was Vern Gagne. That was in 1957.
I think if I went out and started a wrestling association and named myself the heavyweight champion of the world, I'd have tremendous problems credibility-wise.
If you own the shop and you work, you're gonna take best care of yourself. So usually if Vern wrestled, he was on the main event, you know, so of course there was a conflict of interest.
In Vern's eyes, I think that Vern thought he was doing the right thing. But that just doesn't merely mean to say that it was the best thing. And I think that became a problem.
You can't fault him for that because Fritz von Erich was the champion of his territory, and he was the promoter, and he did the same thing. Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder, the same thing. It wasn't unusual, and everybody kind of knew that that's the way it was. So.
The primary reason that a lot of promoters and owners of territories in the early days of wrestling were the top stars was very simple. They individually were the one person in the territory that could be trusted. They had the most to lose. It was their home base. They owned the business, and they knew they weren't going to walk out.
There is nobody who could look at what Vern accomplished as an amateur and as a pro at that point and say, this guy doesn't deserve to be a champion. In fact, I think you can make the case Vern Gagne is probably one of the 5 or 6 greatest champions in the history of wrestling, going back to George Hackenschmidt and Frank Gotch at the turn of the 19th century.
Vern was a super talent, there's no doubt about it.
He was athletic.
A lot of quick moves, a lot of acrobatic moves.
Fundamentally, he was very, very sound.
He was very intense in the ring.
Worked very snug.
Everything he did in the ring was so believable, and it was believable because he'd knock your block off.
wonderful worker. He could wrestle with anybody.
He had a certain flair to him. He had a lot of charisma.
Was a real grassroots wrestler who had fantastic technique.
He was one of my idols in terms of who I'd want to be like in the ring.
I guess you could call him a master in the ring. He was excellent to work with.
He was a model that I think all the young athletic type babyface wrestlers sort of emulated.
Vern had the ability to sell tickets and draw money. He wasn't stupid enough to think that, well, I'll be my champion just out of ego. He still had to make money for himself, his family, and all the families and talents that wrestle for him.
Vern Gagne with anybody would draw money. Him and Billy Robinson had some phenomenal matches.
I think Billy Robinson, for a pure wrestler, was the hardest one I ever wrestled. And he was great on the submission hold.
One of the greatest technical wrestlers in the world.
He was a tremendous technician.
He had good balance, good speed.
Just a superb athlete.
All of his matches were like a fight. I mean, he was a showman, but he was also brought credibility to the ring.
Was probably the most knowledgeable wrestler.
His scientific knowledge of the moves and the counter moves and everything made me raise my bar.
And I think that he probably was, pound for pound, probably one of the toughest wrestlers in his day.
One of the big drawers of that time was Vern against Nick Bockwinkel.
Of course, Bockwinkel came from a great wrestling family. His father, Warren Bockwinkel, had been a good-sized star in the 40s and 50s wrestling against Lou Thesz. He was just very, very good, like Gorgeous George was, or Buddy Rogers, at playing the arrogant heel once he got in the ring.
He had that edge about him, that very arrogant edge that got people, you know, riled against him.
He was the kind of wrestler you loved to hate.
There was a guy that I always perceived as a class act.
A class act as a world champion.
He was a class act. He was not a big, huge, muscular specimen by any means, but he had this certain air about him.
Whenever he was the AWA champion, he was a very, very distinguished looking.
Carried himself in the ring like a true professional. I mean, when you saw the guy, you just knew that he was the real deal.
He looked like the Hollywood type that he portrayed.
Sports coats or suits, blonde hair.
He was really smooth on the mic, and he'd use big long words that he didn't understand, and nobody else did either. And
predominantly above my great talent, my skill, my intestinal fortitude, my guts, my cunning, is my intelligence.
The guy spoke very eloquently. He was excellent on interviews.
And could work and get the point across and tell a good story and have a great match.
I would put him up there in the top 5 of all time that I've ever wrestled. I think the guy was just great.
Nick Bockwinkel, to me, in the AWA, was probably one of their most premier guys on their roster.
Ultimately, I spent the last 17 years of my career in the AWA, and it was terrific. Once you got used to having off 3.5 days a week, it was fun.
He would run shows once a month where all the other America was run weekly. And he picked huge cities that wouldn't support a weekly business and turned that into a hugely successful company by running them once a month. He was way ahead of the game for running big cities.
when I worked in the AWA, it was one of the territories to work in, especially in the wintertime. Wintertime was the wrestling season in the Midwest.
Through the winter months, those were the best months of the year. The end of April was the best cards of the year. You'd sell out the 25, 30,000 seat buildings. And you aimed your big matches for that.
From May to about the middle of June, we took time off. And then we started back up the major cities. And then in October, we brought in Andre the Giant. We ran battle royals. And then we ran 30 towns. I mean, from October 1st to October 30th, you were working every night. And that was major cities and small towns. You needed all of them to make the territory work and everybody to make a living and a promotion to survive.
There was a lot of driving. There was 2 or 3 guys in the car at the time. You got to be very good friends. You spend more time with them than you do your own family, actually.
I thought the earth was flat and I was going to drive off the edge one day out there. I never drove so far in my life. All the way up to Winnipeg, all the way down to Rockford, Illinois, down to Omaha.
We used to be able to travel with some of the veterans, and you would talk wrestling all the way down. So you would really learn the whole concept of professional wrestling and what it was all about.
We had the top talent, great wrestlers. We had a good promotion department, strong television, and we had a guy like Verne Gagne who really knew wrestling, and we had all of the right elements to make the AWA the premier wrestling promotion.
We were the highest rated television show. One show beat us, and that was 60 Minutes. They had a 65 share of the audience. We had a 64 share. Our ratings ranged from a 22 to a 27 rating. You don't even hear of ratings like that. We had those same numbers in Chicago, in Denver, in Milwaukee, in Omaha, in Green Bay, and in Winnipeg. Verne produced the TV show and got the TVs for us. He brought wrestling to television and legitimized the sport.
The AWA, as far as I know, was one of the first wrestling promotions to do big extravaganza wrestling in the big outdoor ball fields. The AWA, again, and Verne was instrumental in this kind of a format.
Large crowds, no matter where, it's an upper. When you go out there and you've got 25, 30,000 people that are watching you, you're pushing, you're putting out, you're busting your butt. Because you have, it's just basically self-pride as a professional. If you don't have that, get out of it. You're in the wrong business.
We're now going to graduate to the ring to a style of wrestling that has evolved here in America over the last 40 years. It's a philosophy of wrestling called professional wrestling.
Verne wanted to do a movie on professional wrestling. He made some contacts in Hollywood. They liked the idea, put the whole thing together. It was a pretty darn good movie, really. And it was quite successful.
It was wrestling, and he wanted to tell the story of the build-up to a match. And the match was him and Billy Robinson.
Hi, Billy.
Hi, Mike.
Well, here I am. What's up?
Mike, I want a match with you.
No way.
That was his idea, and he got it on the screen.
We're gonna be the champions of the world. We're gonna beat Crusher and Bruiser so bad that the whole town's gonna stand up and say, "We are with you, Rhodes. We are with you, Murdoch." Oh, go on, brother. You got it. You got it. You got it.
Well, fans, you've heard Dirty Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch talking about their match.
Anytime you can step out or think out of the box and get your talent involved in other media, it's part of the picture.
Professional wrestling is pain and blood and pulled tendons and broken bones and headaches and backaches and pain. McDaniel, you are going to experience pain. I'm gonna send you on a trip.
Verne knew what he wanted. He understood wrestling. He understood television. He knew promotion. He was a good businessman. You know, Verne had television deals and was busy setting up the TV network and doing all that. That was his, forte, if you will.
The AWA was a certain upper Midwest part of the country. NWA was pretty much down south, out to the west. And then, of course, WWF was what I call the Northeast Triangle, Pittsburgh, Washington, Maine. And those were the places that encompassed all of those three organizations.
WWF was the pinnacle, but if AWA was underneath it, it wasn't by much in the 70s.
If you wanted to get television exposure and you wanted to make money and you wanted to become a star, if you will, you came to Minnesota. You came to Verne, and Verne had his training camp. Verne trained I could sit here for an hour and name all the wrestlers that Vern trained at his training camp.
AWA is responsible for some of the biggest stars ever. Ever.
Stevens and Patterson are going to go all the way to the top, the world's tag team champions.
You know, Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, Dusty Rhodes. I mean, it's a who's who list of people that made this business.
Tight organization, run the correct way. Talent, oh my God. Better than New York at the time. The talent was twice as good as New York at the time.
Pedro Morales.
He was handpicked. He picked all the good stuff, you know. He knew what he was doing.
I think Vern had a great eye for talent and a great eye for the athlete. I think also he was probably underrated as having an eye for the sizzle. But when you look back at guys like Hulk Hogan and Jesse the Body Ventura and Bobby the Brain Heenan that were great sports entertainers in their day, all largely established their roots in Minneapolis.
If you trained up there, people knew that you came out ready to rock and roll. Now, I'm not talking about musically. I mean, they knew that you had sound fundamentals and were taught the business right.
He was making you show your intense dedication to the game. And that was part of the price you were going to pay to get into the club.
Coming to train basically meant coming to get the living kicked out of you.
We would do 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. And we worked out on a farm my dad had out in Chanhassen, Minnesota. And you can imagine in Minnesota, the end of November and through December when we trained, what it was like in there. Everybody that came out of that camp was successful and made money in professional wrestling.
You gotta know how to fall. If you don't know how to fall, you're gonna get hurt. And if you're hurt, you can't wrestle. If you can't wrestle, you don't eat. It's that simple.
I mean, you know, some people would say they were almost barbaric in a sense, but if you look at the success rate, if you look at the bottom line, you'd have to say he was one of the best.
He could take an individual and know how to build him into a star. They all became stars.
From Algeria, Mad Dog Vachon. Mad Dog Vachon.
Mad Dog Vachon, 10 years in professional wrestling, never made it. But to get out his background and where he came from, where his family came from, and what he did, my father helped bring that out.
I said to myself, deep down in the mind, deep down when it was dark and cool, I said, wouldn't that be a nice place for someone like Blackwell?
Wow.
That's where I had the idea of building the Spine Box.
And Mad Dog he was a frickin' lunatic.
Here comes the Crusher!
The Crusher was probably the most unique wrestler ever.
Does he know that I won Mr. Saloon 10 years in a row in Milwaukee?
Wait a minute.
What do you think, he's some crumb bum he's fooling around with?
10 years in a row, the title of Mr. Saloon?
That's right.
What does it mean?
That means that I was the best in the world. That title is recognized more than any title in the world, because you can win Mr. Saloon. You got to do a lot of things to do that. You got to be able to polka. You got to be able to throw drunks out of the saloon. There's a lot involved.
He liked to go in the bars at night and drink beer, and he would train with a keg of beer on his shoulder. Well, when my father brought that interview out of him and who he really was, he became a superstar.
The Clawmaster, Baron Von Raschke. Von Raschke.
Baron Von Raschke, very shy individual. Vern helped bring his personality out.
The Clawmaster, Baron Von Raschke, big, rough, tough, rugged. He is an excellent wrestler, whether you like the dude or not.
The cast on his arm was made out of cement. It was like a brick, like hitting a man with a brick. And that is all the people need to know.
From the great state of Texas, Dick Murdoch and Dirty Dusty Rhodes.
Dusty Rhodes, Dick Murdoch, came up from San Antonio. They made nothing but money here.
They did their damnedest to give the people what they wanted to see. They wanted to see those villains get thrown around and get the dog crap beat out of them. There were so many different guys that knew their part and knew what was required and gave what the people wanted to see.
They call him the crippler, Ray Stevens.
What a great performer Ray Stevens was. He was doing things that other guys didn't do at the time.
He was just a natural. He instinctively did the right thing at the right moment. He was like a cat. One of my favorite people.
Manager Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Bobby Heenan was the greatest manager of all time, bar none. He was the best. My father stuck Bobby Heenan with Nick Bockwinkel, and he brought another look to Bockwinkel that just elevated him to that next level.
Everybody knows I'm gorgeous, pretty, beautiful, whatever you want to call me. But now I have a brain nobody's ever talked about before. You can refer to me from now on as Bobby, the brilliant one, Heenan.
As far as I'm concerned, Bobby Heenan is about an eighth of a step behind Ray Stevens. But he was such an outstanding manager. Everybody thinks of him as a manager. Bobby could replace me in any match, and the building would be just as wild. Bobby could replace Ray in any match, and the building would be just as wild. But I couldn't do what Bobby did, and Ray couldn't do what Bobby did.
You're in the ring now with a professional. I'm going to go behind that man so much he's going to think he's stuck in a revolving door. I'm going to take him down, take him around, show him the town. I'm going to reverse neck snap his neck. I'm going to dislocate both his shoulders. Then I might just paintbrush until my hands are swollen shut.
Bobby was the greatest ad-libber ever. He was sharp like that. He would come on and do an interview and lay him away. And fantastic in the ring. They called him the Weasel.
Heenan hasn't made any friends.
The Crusher started at calling him the Weasel, and he was great. Just fabulous.
The High Flyers, Jim Brunzell, Greg Gagne.
When they put Greg and I together as the High Flyers, we had one good match after another, and the people received us, you know, I mean, it was incredible. We were flying and drop kicking and head scissoring, and we sort of grew a following, and I think, you know, for 5 or 6 years, I mean, we had a heck of a track record.
You see Gene Okerlund. Let's go to him. You know, let's take a look at the size of your hand. I want to compare it to mine. Fans, take a look at this. Can you believe that? Perhaps even, let's compare it to the size of my head. Andre,
Gene was the man. He was the guy.
And I'm going to have to ask you, Nature Boy, what's in store for your opponents and yourself in 1977.
Just a lot more of what happened in 76.
So they were looking for someone to do the wrestling interviews. We gave him a shot, and the rest is history. I still say that Gene was and is the greatest interview and wrestling announcer.
Ladies and gentlemen, superstar Billy Graham.
It really clicked in Minneapolis for me. Really an incredible place to be.
Put the camera up and down my body. These colors are in remembrance of fall. Autumn is here, and I am wearing the colors of autumn on my body. There's more colors on my body than the rainbow in the sky, Daddy. I am a reflection of perfection, the #1 selection.
I began to wear the tie-dye, and I began to make my own tie-dye pants, wrestling pants, and shirts, and so I became a very colorful wrestler with the biggest arms in the world.
The arm wrestling champion of the world.
Thank you for that very fine introduction, because I am not only the arm wrestling champion of the world, but I am the arm wrestling champion of the entire universe. You know, there might be life on Mars. There might be Martians up there, and if there is, I could even beat them with arm wrestling.
Superstar was a deep thinker,
You're about
intelligent,
as slippery as a banana peel.
and when he exploded on the scene, it was really something.
A cover by Gagne. 1, 2, 3.
Vern Gagne with anybody would draw money. Him and Billy Robinson had some phenomenal matches. Vern and Larry the Axe Hennig. They were both from Robbinsdale, Minnesota. They had a natural feud. They hated each other, and they really didn't like each other. Vern and Nick Bockwinkel would sell out wherever they go.
Vern and Nick Bockwinkel was probably the greatest feud he ever created.
Nick Bockwinkel and Vern Gagne dominated the AWA in the 20-year period from 1960 to 1980.
Beating Vern Gagne in his hometown One could salivate on that. I was one of the kind of people that always loved needling him, you know, especially, you know, he was the boss, but didn't make any difference as far as I was concerned.
The whole thing here is, can the aging former champion, can the man who was once a great athlete, does he have enough determination, spirit, and guts? Does he have a quality? When his tank runs dry and he starts scraping the inside of the barrel, will he still have enough under his fingernails to pull him across the line 1 second before me?
Terrific performer in the ring, terrific wrestler. Egotistical, and needless to say, he was hometown boy. So anytime you stepped on his toes and he squealed, they noticed you.
Basically, they were like classic wrestling matches, and for wrestlers to watch that, it was like a thing of beauty because everything was so smooth and well done.
I'm trying to go out as the champion, Gene. It's never been done before, and I would like, my great goal, I suppose, is to retire with the belt.
You knew he was going to put the pressure on you, and that was my intention too. Put the pressure on him to make him perform. It's a little psychological thing between the two guys that are getting in there. And just a little one-upmanship, a little bit better move than the move you made. I made the same move and I made it a little bit better, and there's that competitive thing there, you know, and it's what I liked about Hogan. A lot of similarities there. Yeah, because once that bell rings, you better be idling at 4,000 RPMs.
This crowd and mass hysteria prevailing here tonight. 17,000 strong. Oh, the suplex. How did he do it? 1, 2, 3, and it's all over.
Nick Bockwinkel and Vern Gagne were almost in bed together. They were such good friends. They were such good business partners. They could depend on each other, so they just kept the belt in-house.
The only man in professional wrestling history to go out with the belt, to go out a winner, to retire as champion.
Vern Gagne did the best he could to protect the business. He worked very hard to keep it within the confines of the boys and the ropes of the ring, and didn't tell the fans, you know, the secrets of the industry. So in that respect, I had a lot of respect for Vern Gagne.
The only heavyweight champion of the world, Vern Gagne.
My father had this vision. He loved wrestling, amateur wrestling, professional wrestling, and he wanted to bring it to the forefront of society. He had, with his TV show, had these tremendous ratings, but now let's get it out to the networks. We were wrestling in Chicago, met Phil Donahue, and Phil and him liked one another and wanted to do a show about professional wrestling. So we had an hour program with him. They brought Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis in, and Jim and myself to give him a tag team match, and then Adrian and I wrestled a single match. Actually, the Phil Donahue show was the first appearance of Hulk Hogan.
I knew I couldn't come back to the WWF at the time, which was run by Vince Sr., because I was fired. And I didn't think I would ever be able to work here at the WWE again. So I sent some pictures from the Rocky movie I just finished, the still pictures, to the AWA promotion in Minnesota.
He says, I've quit wrestling, but I'd like to give it one more chance. Could I come into the AWA? And that's about the words he used. And so I think I asked Greg, you'd have heard of a guy named Hulk Hogan.
I had met Hulk at a card at Shea Stadium in New York, and he'd wrestled Andre the Giant that night. And after the matches, he said, you know, I just was sitting in the hallway of the hotel, and I said, what's the matter, big man? He says, I can't make it in professional wrestling. I said, sure you can. You've got a lot of potential. You just need some help developing who you are. And I said, why don't you call my father and come and work for the AWA.
Hulk Hogan arrived on the scene in the early 80s.
When I got to the AWA, Vern Gagne wanted me to be a bad guy.
And Luscious Johnny Valiant was going to be his manager. The past couple of weeks, I have talked with Luscious Johnny Valiant. He has told me so much about this man He is from New York City. He is Hulk Hogan. A big one indeed. Just exactly how big, I'll let you explain.
Let me tell you something. From now on, Pee Wee, you can call me Mr. Skyscraper. I am the biggest man in professional wrestling. And this arm right here, 24 inches of New York City and Venice Beach, California mixed together. The biggest arm in the world. I will take on all comers.
Well, all of a sudden, when Hogan showed up, he was, just idolized by the fans.
Got over like $1 million. That was one of his first breaks he got in Minnesota here. He looked good, but he had no amateur background whatsoever.
He didn't have a feel for who he was and what his character was. And that's what Vern brought out in Hogan.
When you're on a roll and when you think positive, sometimes overconfidence can work for you. And I know I'm gonna win that battle royal, and I know sooner or later, my time is gonna come.
Put him against guys that we thought he could beat, and he got a lot of experience in those matches.
You're going to have to face the likes of a very colorful and flamboyant young man, good wrestler indeed, in rock and roller Buck Zumhofe.
Rock and roll who?
Buck Zumhofe.
Buck Zumhofe.
Well, the one thing that I got from Vern was how to stay strong in the ring. And his words were, don't even go off your feet.
He took to it then. And he then became really Hulk Hogan.
You know what they're scared of, Mean Gene? They're scared that Hulkamania is still running wild. I came into Denver town with both of these 24-inch pythons loaded, and I proved that Hulkamania is still running wild.
Once I became the good guy in the AWA, the movie kicked in after that, and there was just a huge amount of momentum. So Vern Gagne was a very lucky man, and timing was everything. He was there for the title wave.
When Hulk Hogan, 82 and 83, he had brought the standard of attendance and money that the AWA had made to a point that it was the highest it ever been.
The one thing that Vern Gagne realized way before I did was the amount of revenue that Hulk Hogan could generate if he was showcased in the proper manner.
He was money in the bank from day one here.
You know, in the early 80s, AWA was rocking. They were printing money. They were selling out arenas. I mean, everything that they did was successful, and life was great. Everybody was, on a very high note.
He became a star here and earned himself some title matches with Nick Bockwinkel.
Every young wrestler coming up today would like to get a win against the champion.
With Hogan, I like the fact that he was the crowd favorite, because that just made him work harder, just made me work harder.
So they had a title match in St. Paul, Minnesota, sold out.
They had 18,000 in the Civic Center and the building next door. We closed circuit the match over there.
If I'm not mistaken, I think they did probably around $300,000 or $400,000 in revenue between what they sold at the arena and what they sold closed circuit next door at the auditorium. It was a big deal. And 400 grand back in those days, a lot of money.
Well, Vern Gagne had been trying to get me to take the belt for quite some time, and I would have loved to have been the world's champion, but I had other things I was doing, such as going back and forth to Japan.
Hogan clearly had beat Bockwinkel.
Here comes Hogan. Here is the leg smash. Here is the cover. Here is the count. 1, 2, 3. It's all over. Hulk Hogan has done it. Hulk Hogan is the champion.
But there was some kind of a technicality.
I have just been informed by the referee that President Blackburn is of the opinion that Hulk Hogan threw Nick Bockwinkel over the top rope. Because of that, the Hulk is disqualified, and the belt remains with Nick Bockwinkel.
Over the top I went, he's DQ'd. Shame.
The title did not change, kept in Nick Bockwinkel's possession, and the fans were livid.
Again, so very, very close.
That really set Hulk off. I mean, his whole goal was to win that AWA World Championship, and when he didn't win it that time, it was a huge disappointment for him.
Vern Gagne wanted everything. If I took the belt, then he wanted my money from Japan, and he wanted percentages of other things I was doing, like selling T-shirts and stuff. So on that Super Sunday, Vern had basically made his mind up that I was winning the match. And when they came to me with a finish, you know, Vern said, "You're winning the belt. Plus, you know, I'm getting part of your Japan deal." I said, "No, you're not." And so we went back and forth and we fought about it. And I think that was basically the decline of Vern Gagne and my relationship.
I don't think he was good enough to win the title.
You know, you needed people in there, though, because of the way the people in the AWA, the fans, perceived it. You had to be pretty darn good in the ring and be able to carry a match, you know, 20, 30 minutes. And Hulk was almost to the point where he could do that. Not quite.
We really didn't need him to be champion. He's trying to get the champion. Oh God, Hogan's gonna get a shot at the title tonight. Well, and everybody's excited about it, but he don't get it. So we put it that way, we do it again. And he's another full house.
It really disappointed the fans because he canceled a show in the St. Paul Civic Center, made the people wait an extra month before the monthly show usually came, doubled the ticket prices, everybody expected a title change, and with the demands he put on me, I couldn't let that happen. So he basically started to ruin the relationship that he had with me and the fans at that point.
You know, even back then, what was funny is you heard about his merchandise sales, which was something new at that time. I mean, you know, some people did a little bit of merchandise, but, you know, it was all of a sudden, you know, to the wrestlers, it's like, wow, this is a new avenue for revenue.
Merchandise wasn't even a concept. I actually started making the first T-shirts and headbands when we were in the AWA, and that was one of our big blow-offs because when I went to Japan for a few weeks, Vern sold a ton of Hulk Hogan shirts and kept all the proceeds for his own party fund and didn't give Hulk Hogan his proper split. And we had a big argument over that. That was one of the final straws that broke the camel's back.
I mean, it wasn't like going in today and doing, what did they do in London? $1 million worth of merchandising in one night? You might do maybe $5,000 in Hogan shirts and $1,000 of High Flyer shirts. So by the time they took, you know, their end out and you got your percent, I mean, there wasn't that much to get.
Hogan wasn't going to tolerate anything less than 50% of the profit that was generated by his character in terms of merchandise. So Vern Gagne missed the boat on really being able to capitalize on Hulk Hogan. If he would have left enough money on the table, it would have happened. He didn't, and it didn't happen.
There was word going around that Hogan was disgruntled.
And I think as a result of it, he made the jump back to the WWE.
Well, it was tough leaving the AWA because I just sat around a hotel room with Vern Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel and helped them book the whole next month of bookings with me in a steel cage all around the territory with Bockwinkel. When I got back to Minnesota, after being on the road a couple days with those guys, I got a call from Vince McMahon Jr., and he had an offer I couldn't refuse. He flew into Minnesota. We stayed up till 5 in the morning talking. We shook hands, and the rest is history. So it was tough to walk away from Vern Gagne in the AWA because I was booked in a lot of the main events.
And main eventers were obligated to give a 6-week notice, which would allow 6 weeks to change storylines on television and let someone else be anointed the main eventer.
Before he left, he cut all of his interviews so that we had them in the can building up to the matches, because at that time you were syndicating your program. So you would have to get the shows out a week or 2 weeks ahead of time. And it was like the 18th or 19th of December, my father got a telegram from Tampa, Florida that said Hogan was not coming back. But my father and Eddie Graham always were playing jokes on one another. And he saw Tampa, Florida, he figured Eddie had sent it to him. He said, well, that damn Eddie, he thinks he's gonna get me on this one. He tore it up and threw it away. Got to be Christmas night, no Hogan. I called Hulk at home. I said, Hulk, we got a match. What are you doing? Well, I'm going to New York. And I said, well, when? Well, in January. I said, well, fulfill your commitments and then go.
He didn't have enough balls to come up and say to my face, hey, I'm gonna leave.
Well, I'm being paid more not to be there. That's the story he gave me.
I've always encouraged talent to finish out their dates, you know, with promoters and so forth, keep their word. I don't remember, you know, whether or not that was the case when I was with Hogan and trying to encourage him to come with us. I'm sure it had, you know, a negative effect, on Vern's territory, no question about that, especially if Hogan had been advertised.
It was too bad it came to that, because Hulk was developed here, became the Hulk here, and was able then to take it to the next level with Vince Jr.
Because he was well-trained enough to do what he had to do to draw people. And he did that all here. McMahon didn't have to do it. I did it.
To lose Hogan was huge for the AWA.
You take a top star like that and have him walk out on you because of decisions, not smart.
Prior to Hogan leaving us, CBS had come to my father and wanted to do a big Saturday night special on CBS. And when we lost Hogan, we lost that.
Hogan was the harbinger, and once Hogan came here, which was the top dog in the AWA, so many from the AWA wanted to follow in Hogan's footsteps.
I wasn't too far beyond Hulk Hogan. We arrived here in the WWE simultaneously, so I didn't get to see the carnage that was left in the back there in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Gene, all of a sudden on a Sunday night, we did our interviews on Monday morning. Gene was our head announcer. Our 20 syndicated programs, we did 5 interviews on every program. Monday mornings, we're slated to do all those interviews, put them in the shows, and get them out. He calls late Sunday night, like 11 o'clock. Hey, I'm going to New York. I said, well, Gene, do the interviews tomorrow, then go. We're stuck. We can't get an announcer this quick. Well, they're paying me more to go up there.
My son, Gary, who was a producer and a referee, went with Hulk and some of the guys to New York. And as things kind of quieted down here, for me, I also went to New York.
And every one of them, Jesse Ventura, cut all his interviews for Winnipeg. They're all in the box. The last one never showed up for the match. Everybody that went to New York did that to us. The only one was Bobby Heenan. Bobby fulfilled all his entire commitments before he left.
It was going downhill because they lost Hogan, and they lost Gene Okerlund, and they lost Jesse.
So what it ended up doing was hurting your credibility. And then pretty soon Vince had more AWA stars than we had. And then he would come in and run Denver the night before we would with more of the AWA people than what we had.
Why didn't you sign on to contracts? And it wasn't that what Vince bought them off, and Vince, it was opportunity.
They all saw greener pastures, if you will.
It was very simple. It was called money, and an opportunity to play with somebody that was going to have great production values. They were going to be streamlined, and they just had that high-tech feel to it.
At this point, Vince Jr. is an enigma. He has not yet established with everybody else who he is, what he is, how he's going to do things now that he's taking over from his dad.
Vince Jr. had bought the place from his father, and the scuttlebutt everywhere was, this kid's he's going to break all the rules.
There were even stories that Vince Sr. called a number of people who he respected quite well, one of them being Wally Carbo, that the kids are going to take over the business, and I just want you to know he's got some big plans.
At one time, he came and met with my father and I, and asked my father if he would be willing to sell out. And he said, well, Vince, I've got a lot of years into this, and if the money was right, yes, I would do it. But you have to realize I have partners in all these cities.
I think that Vern was very willing to sell AWA, but he had to get his house in order first with other promoters and contractual rights that he didn't have. But I don't know what he would have asked for as a price tag. I'm sure it would have been hefty, but he never had really the opportunity, because after he got his ducks in a row, then we became competitors.
Never heard from him again until all this started happening in December. That was August of '83, now December of '83. That's when the big push came, and Vince started grabbing the talent from all the different territories. He started going in and offering money for our television time slots that we'd built up for years and years. A lot of people weren't too happy with him. To this day, a lot of people aren't.
Well, I don't know that, that's really unfair. What's unfair about attempting to approach a television station, who had Vern's television show on and saying, hey, mine's better, I want to take Vern's slot. I don't think that's unethical at all. I think that's what's known as competition. And one of the problems with these old-time promoters, Vern included, was that they never had any competition. They really didn't know how to deal with competition.
His dad and I got along well, and I wrestled up there for him a lot of times in their area, and I don't know what young Vince had in mind to do it. I mean, what did he gain by it? He didn't gain friends.
Every philosophy that Vern had worked and was successful and made him a millionaire. But when this young kid comes up from a man that Vern respected, which was Vince Sr., and is going to break every rule in this industry, on top of that, he's going to have characters that are almost cartoon characters. He's going to tell you that it's not a real sporting event. He should be shot. What's going on here? This will never last. It'll never work.
And Vern used to say, how come he's running in my town? Well, I mean, you go to any corner, there's 4 gas stations, and you can put a gas station in any corner. It's the way business is. You don't like it, move to Cuba.
I was expanding, and Minneapolis was a stop on the way. It wasn't that I was coming after Vern, that wasn't it. But Vern was retaliatory, and I'm not so sure I wouldn't have been as well, although I think I'd like to be smarter than that.
Vince was coming into his backyard, so he started going to Vince's backyard.
But Vern was retaliatory, and he said, hey, look, if the kid's gonna, come into Minneapolis, I'm gonna go to New York. That's a mistake.
If I were Vern, I would concentrate on the things I had and make them secure and tight. But he was, I don't know, it must have shaken him up a bit.
People in the business expected Vern, the great Vern Gagne, to do something about it. I mean, this punk kid was coming into his territory, which was a no-no. And, what are you gonna do about it, Vern? And when you don't know anything about a market like New York and you come into, quote, New York, your chances of success are not too great.
Vince's philosophy is totally different than my father. I mean, they're night and day apart. My father everything was about athletics and athletes and competing.
Big contributor to the Olympic effort, former world champion Vern Gagne.
Jim, congratulations. We're so proud of you and our Minnesota team. And to this guy right here, Brad Rheingans, who brought those 3 heavyweights in there to all medal winners. 2 golds and a silver was absolutely fantastic. Proud of each and every one of them.
Vince, flamboyant, showbiz. You have to have that with wrestling to make it work. We know that. And we had that, but my father was very conservative in the way he ran his wrestling.
WWE had really made a big move, to national syndication and national cable television, kind of was tearing down the walls, if you will, of the regional, wrestling promoter, model. And a lot of promoters, were suffering as a result of that, not the least of which was Vern Gagne.
But I don't think they admitted it to themselves. If they had admitted it to themselves and said, whoa, we cannot let this happen again, we'll get us another Hulk, or we'll attempt to get another Hulk, or anybody else, if we push them, we're gonna lock them up. I think they were still under the mindset at that time that you were very lucky if you were in the AWA.
We had a lot of good guys around. We didn't really need him. We're drawing it. Before Hogan, we were filling the houses up.
At the end of that year, the AWA in this area had its biggest year ever after the guys had left. So, they still had a core of Jerry Blackwell and Mad Dog and Crusher. And, so it's not good to lose a lot of talent like we had, but it was not felt immediately. I think that's what lulled Vern into a sense of complacency.
He was pretty complacent in what he was doing. And he should be, because it was, 25, 30 years of success. But with the onslaught of cable television and big-time wrestling and the WWE coming in and doing what they did, it drastically changed Vern's wrestling league or wrestling promotion.
They brought in other stars like Bruiser Brody.
I've been brought here for a reason. And before it's all over, I know everybody's gonna know my business just like I know it.
Nothing. Abdul the Butcher, no. Didn't mean nothing.
1 week you have Andre and Hulk Hogan, and next week you got
Rooster Griffin.
The house goes from here to here. You got no talent. You got to take care of your talent.
And Vern lost his grip on it, and he had Rick Martel, was the world champion then.
And here is a flying power body slam. A count of 1, a count of 2, a count of 3. And the new heavyweight champion of the world out of Quebec City, Canada, is Ricky Martel.
And certainly no disrespect to Rick, who's a phenomenal competitor and performer. I just never thought he was going to be the answer as the AWA champion.
Ricky Martel, the new heavyweight champion of the world. AWA President Stanley Blackburn, what a bombshell that was.
I thought it was the greatest match I've ever seen in at least 40 years. It was fantastic. It was really the greatest.
But what the AWA seemed to be doing at the time was grasping at straws and trying things to ignite a spark and recreate an interest in their brand.
But as things began to crumble for Vern in the AWA, mid-'80s, late '80s, Vern had to rely on the people that he could rely on. Certainly Greg Gagne, his son, and a small core of wrestlers that Vern trusted.
He's got his daddy hiding out behind the ringside chair.
I never worked in the AWA, but I've had, dozens of friends and business acquaintances that have, and a lot of guys felt like that Vern tried a little too hard to get Greg on that main event level where Greg could be Vern's predecessor.
Greg, of course, also with designs on the heavyweight championship of the world, a belt which his father held for so many, many years.
There was always a lot of conversation about Greg's role in AWA as it related to, being a performer, being a tag team champion, being a world champion.
Greg was outstanding in tag teams, but Greg never had the individual charisma that his dad had.
Greg is under a lot of pressure that most people don't realize. Myself, coming from a wrestling family, every time you step in that ring, you not only represent your own self and your own professional pride, but that of your family and your father. And Greg wrestled for years, and so did mine. And he has that family pride, family reputation to protect.
Thinking of wrestlers that, the only reason Greg Gagne is even in the ring is because he's Vern's son. Well, you know what? That's probably true to a degree. But the truth of the matter is, Vern knew he could trust Greg. Vern knew he could depend on Greg. Greg was a great performer.
Down he goes, Gagne, nice and smooth.
I actually know that Greg had a better grasp of where the business was at that time and where it was going.
Eventually, someday, Brody, we're going to find out what kind of a man you are and how good you really are.
Once there were other wrestling programs coming in that were modernizing, that did have rock and roll, that, we're trying to reach a younger demographic, a younger audience, the business started passing Vern by, in my view. I don't think it was passing Greg by, but his father was holding him back.
At one point, my father got the promoters together when Vince first made his move to take over the world. Got together with the Crockett's, with Jim Barnett, with Fritz von Erich, with Don Owens, with Bill Watts, formed a group, and we were going to run these super cards, bringing everybody together and do a TV show out of the different arenas, adding the talent from all the different areas.
Welcome to the greatest event in the history of professional wrestling, Super Clash 85 and Night of Champions. I'm Larry Nelson, and with me, the man that put the whole thing together, Mr. Vern Gagne. Vern, it was a tremendous amount of work, but you've got to be proud of the results.
Well, I am, and I'd like to thank each and every one of these people that came out here tonight to watch this great event, this great spectacular night of wrestling.
The reason that the Super Clash came about, and the reason the AWA and the NWA decided to co-promote an event was very simple: desperation. It was to attempt to derail the WWE train that was gaining speed and bearing down the tracks.
I think the fact that Vince McMahon was coming in and being very successful, that some of these guys that always, you know, shook your hand but had the other hand behind the back, were now realizing we better buddy up here or we're in serious trouble.
It was a good concept, but again, the egos of all the different promoters, they wanted their guy up here, they wanted this for their main event. It got to be where you couldn't control it. You really couldn't get what needed to be done to go against McMahon.
They were a straggled bunch. Most of them were from the old school of promoters. There was not enough glue or enthusiasm for them to collectively come together to do this battle.
It wasn't significant for me at all, the fact that on occasion they would join forces, because I knew it couldn't last.
David Crockett is in the locker room trying to sign some of our talent to a contract to come with them. So if you can't trust the people you're working with, how in the world are you ever going to make that work?
It was doomed to fail from day one.
Rick Martel with a serious back injury, and he can't take it anymore. And they're calling it off. Now, wait a minute. Unbelievable. Can it be that Stan the Lariat Hansen has won? Yes, Stan the Lariat Hansen, the new champion of the AWA. I don't know what this means, but it can't be anything good.
Stan Hansen was supposed to wrestle me one night in Denver. And there was a very good, and at that point, he was the AWA champion. And there was a very good possibility that he was going to lose that night. And he left the building.
I was very surprised when Hansen became the AWA champion, because Stan had already established himself as a huge star in Japan. Stan was making more money in Japan than he would ever make as the AWA champion, in the shape that the AWA was in financially and how they were drawing at that time.
His loyalty was to himself and Japan, not to any American promotion. And so he left that night before we wrestled and took the belt with him.
I'm not in a big ego rush. I'm not after all the bright lights and the little women. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them. And anybody that takes money out of my pocket, Larry Zbyszko, I'm gonna get them. Get out of there. You know, and you gotta hand it to this man. This man.
He was making more money than a lot of Major League Baseball players, a lot of guys in the NFL. So why wouldn't he go to Japan? Why would you think he wouldn't go? So it kind of stirred the pot, but a lot of people laughed at the AWA for saying, well, how can you guys be surprised?
Which, of course, then they had to throw in a battle royal, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, they just, of course, took the belt away from him, took the title away from him. And Stan, I guess, when they told him, cease and desist, calling yourself the AWA champion, or we will take legal action, Stan, he wasn't ready for that. And so, good old South Mississippi boy, he took and he actually ran over the AWA belt. And, they got a slight curve to it, but it was like, had a kink in it there and the muddy tracks were right across the belt.
It was just another indication that things at the times were passing the promotion by.
No matter how difficult things were, and I can't emphasize enough, as bad as things were in the AWA, you would never know that walking through the door. I mean, you could figure it out when there was less and less people in the offices, and there was just less activity. There was not much going on, so it was easy to see that, this is not a viable business. But at the same time, Vern was always so positive.
Today's match is part of Vern Gagne's Pro Wrestling USA, covering the United States and Canada. Vern, the cool last week Sergeant Slaughter here in the AWA. Now these great matches, the AWA, truly the major league of professional wrestling.
Well, I think it's always been the major league of professional wrestling, and of course Sergeant Slaughter being on the scene kind of adds to that. But we do want to let our fans know that we want to bring them the very best in professional wrestling. We feel we have over the years. We're going to continue to do so. It's going to get better and better all the time.
Vern made an attempt to change the way he presented his wrestling and had to do it, I'll say it more like what New York was doing.
Well, a big coup for us was to get on ESPN. That was the new sports network. It was still growing.
Thank you very much, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here with ESPN.
There was somebody I knew that was in ESPN. I think I contacted him and that would do the wrestling. So they agreed to it. I mean, they wanted to, so it was good for them, and it was good for us at the time.
AWA, the Major League of Professional Wrestling, here for you great fans all across the country on ESPN.
We taped any number of places.
At the Tropicana in Atlantic City.
Welcome to AWA Championship Wrestling from the Tropicana Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City.
One of them was right here in Vegas. Used to be the Showboat.
Good, this Showboat. That was amazing. Leave cold Minneapolis and got to Las Vegas.
They wanted wrestling, and thank God they did. It was great for us. It gave us that national outlet so that we could draw some of the talent that were going to be on Turner Network and on Vince's big network, USA. So it kept us in competition.
Now, for all you idiots who've been watching ESPN all these years, watching guys they call athletes who ride around on horses and hit balls or swim and play water polo, you're looking at real athletes here.
They had a little rejuvenation with some new faces.
Wrestling fans, as I'm certain you well know, promoters here in the AWA never cease to bring you the biggest and best talent available, and they are already hard at work at bringing one of the most devastating tag teams you will ever see. Take a look at this match featuring Animal and Hawk, the Road Warriors.
Just two dynamic characters, and with Ellering being sneaky on the outside, they're kind of an overwhelming team.
Probably one of the most devastating teams that has ever been seen in professional wrestling in a number of years, the Road Warriors.
Again, they came in just after these other guys had left, so they filled, I guess, that void. If there was a void, they filled it. So that's why part of the reason the business stayed up.
The Midnight Rockers, Marty Jannetty, Shawn Michaels.
I saw a tape of Shawn from San Antonio, Texas. Jose Lothario trained Shawn. And I saw a tape of Marty Jannetty. And I said, God, we ought to put these two together. At that time, the Rock and Roll Express was hot. I said, why don't we, let's come up with a name for them, the Rockers or something. And they came up with the Midnight Rockers, because they did rock all night long, those two. They were tough to handle.
And here's a drop kick. Oh!
There aren't many people that could get that high in a drop kick, believe me.
They brought a lot to us also. I mean, they brought a different kind of wrestling, more fast-paced and that kind of thing.
And these are the things that you're going to be seeing every time you see the Midnight Rockers defend their championship.
Him and Buddy Rose and Doug Summers. Unbelievable feuds. Great matches.
Here is 2. Here is 3. And they have finally done it.
Sherry Martel was like a shining star.
Here is Scott Hall.
That young man is certainly powerful. I don't know if in the last decade, have I seen anyone any more strong than that, Larry?
The Nasty Boys.
Now, you two are the newest tag team combination in the AWA. How did you come by the name The Nasty Boys?
We came by the way of the Nasty Boys, Donna, because we're mean and we're rude. And you know that song Janet Jackson wrote? She wrote it about us two right here, because she saw us one day driving through the cities and saw how we acted. And we are a bunch of rude dogs, let me tell you, Donna.
High-flying, exciting wrestling action via the Guerrero brothers, ladies and gentlemen, a team that I'm sure the Destruction Crew is looking forward to facing at some point in time.
When I started with Vern Gagne in the AWA, I started in syndication. Which is really a glorified way of saying sales. I had never intended to be on camera. I had no desire to be on camera. And my phone rings, and it's Greg Gagne. Greg says, "Eric, what are you doing today?" He said, oh, Vern, I've got this appointment, I'm going to make this phone call, and it's kind of pretty much ran through my day. He goes, come on over to the TV studio, I want to talk to you. Oh, that's weird, You let me behind the curtain. So I hung the phone up, and long story short, an announcer that was up to that moment employed by the AWA had apparently, allegedly, covering my ass here, gotten a DUI the night before and had been arrested, put in jail. And because he was in jail, he wasn't in the AWA studios conducting the interview with 25 or 30 wrestlers who had all been flown in. So Vern and Greg were kind of stuck. There was nobody there to conduct the interviews. And I think the theory was, wait a minute, Eric's here. He's got a shirt and tie. I'm sure he's got his sport coat. Let's let him do the interviews. He can be our announcer.
And at this point, let's bring in Sergeant Slaughter, G.I. Joe himself.
Thank you, Eddie.
Paul Heyman even went to the AWA for a while.
We've been making this place so much money, they now buy new sets.
Curt Hennig, as far as I'm concerned, was meant to be one of the future stars.
Curt, certainly one of the really rising and up and coming stars in the professional wrestling world.
Curt was a phenomenal wrestler, and I think a good testament to Vern and to Greg in terms of his skill in the ring, his training.
Fans, again, as I told you, Curt Hennig continuing to electrify the crowds all throughout the AWA.
He was very close to being Mr. Perfect in my book.
And Curt was a hometown guy.
Curt Hennig out of Robbinsdale, Minnesota, 232 pounds.
He did everything the hard way. He worked hard, wrestled hard, and was a good athlete. He looked good, talked good. Probably one of the greatest wrestlers of all time.
With less than 60 seconds remaining, these two men have given everything that there is to give. Not only that they have to give, but there is to give to the sport of professional wrestling.
Still to this day, I remember the matches that he had with Nick Bockwinkel. Great matches.
And as I'm standing here right now, Larry Nelson, I've got the most confidence. This is the best I've ever felt. And I just want to tell you something, Nick Bockwinkel. On May 2nd in San Francisco in the Cow Palace, I am going to walk out the heavyweight champion of the world.
He was the next one in line that had all the characteristics and qualities to make a good champion.
Hennig comes up and hammers away. Count of 1, 2, 3.
I think at that time that the AWA had spent a lot of money with Curt on the TV shows and promotion. And they figured out if this guy had left there that it was going to get worse.
I think those people were using Vern's AWA essentially as a springboard to follow in the footsteps of their predecessors like Ventura, like Okerlund, like the Hulk, like Bobby Heenan, because they could turn on the television and see how well those individuals, among others, were doing.
It was toward the end because they were giving out those bogus 2-year contracts, trying to keep everybody there. I just kept, I just kept stringing them along because I had no intention to ever sign that contract. Because Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels had signed the contract, and Vern would not. They got a call to come up here before I did, and Vern would not let them out of the contract. They would have been up here a lot sooner had that not happened. So I watched from their mistakes and tried to learn.
I'm sure a lot of them were thinking, boy, if I can just, have somebody that's in the WWE that I know recommend me.
I didn't have any problem picking up and going.
They were probably hoping that they could get caught up in the WWE, and most of those guys did. Curt did, and Shawn Michaels and the Destruction Crew. They all moved over to WWE, so I suppose that's where their hope was, because it was things were crumbling around us. Crumble, crumble, crumble.
When Jerry Jarrett and I developed this relationship with Vern Gagne in the 80s, we saw an opportunity to do something in our territory that we had never been able to do before, and that was change a world championship.
So much riding on this for the King. If he cannot wrest the crown away from Curt Hennig, Lawler will hang it up and end an incredible 50
Burt. He's not moving well in the ring. Hennig looks like the stronger of the two at the moment.
We actually did a telephone poll and let the fans decide who the referee was going to be, whether it was between Curt Hennig's father, Larry the Axe Hennig, or my mentor, Jackie Fargo. And of course, the fans voted for Jackie Fargo to come in and be the special referee in that match.
The referee tells Hennig to back up while Fargo looks at the eye. He was tempted to stop it right then and there. Look at Hennig blast that eye. Hennig is just blasting him unmercifully on that eye. And the referee keeps checking it, but Lawler stops Fargo from giving the match. Boom! And Lawler with the right hand puts Hennig down. He's a long way from through. This guy with this amazing ability to come back, the king, Jerry Lawler, shoots him on a catapult into the turnbuckle. Hennig is down. The crowd wants Lawler to come over and cover up. He covers. 1, 2. He got a new world heavyweight champion, Jerry Lawler, in 24-27. Incredible.
When I finally did win the title, it was huge for us there in Memphis, and it was huge for all our fans who had been behind me since the 70s, hoping for me to win a title.
Jerry Jarrett, promoter Eddie Marlin. They're all up there as the king turned what looked like sure defeat into a victory.
Quite honestly, I don't for a minute believe that it would have happened had not Curt already had the intentions of leaving the AWA and going to Vince McMahon, the WWE. I think the deal was already done. As a matter of fact, I think Curt left the following week. So I still think, of course, that Verne Gagne looked at it as a sad day for the AWA because, you know, it was strictly out of necessity for him because his current champion was leaving him. December 13th, 1988 was the date of Super Clash 3, the big pay-per-view that the promoters were putting on to hopefully show the world that, man, they could compete with Vince McMahon.
This is an event that we have been waiting for months, ladies and gentlemen, and finally it is here. Are you ready, Chicago?
I don't think it meant anything, the fact that AWA finally made it to pay-per-view. I think they were following, obviously, instead of leading as far as that was concerned.
It was a promotion with the group out of Dallas, with the Memphis group, and with the AWA.
You got a promoter in Fritz Von Erich. You got Jarrett down there, and he's half egomaniac. And you're working with Verne, he's got an ego. And now you're going to try and do a combined show.
So it was Verne's attempt to kind of take the last of the remaining kind of independent promoters and territories, if you will, put them under one big umbrella and compete on pay-per-view.
You've seen pay-per-view shows before where one man meets another man from the same organization. Come on, you've seen that 5 or 6 times already.
I knew they couldn't order a cup of coffee together, much less work together, plan together, and have a united front.
What we're talking about is a super clash. Not only a clash between great athletes, but a clash of organizations.
That was impossible. I wasn't concerned with that at all.
Our office, and I was in the territory at that time, in Mid-South Wrestling, and then it became the UWF. We didn't participate in that. It was a joke.
It had the potential of deriving huge dollars.
They were hoping that this would lend them the credibility with the cable companies if it were successful, that they would somewhere be able on one of the networks to get a weekly shot on cable.
A giant night of wrestling, and each and every bit of it is live. I said live, right here in Chicago.
Probably all the top talent that hadn't already signed with Vince McMahon was on this pay-per-view.
Super Clash 3, the greatest event in all of professional wrestling.
The AWA did not have the talent base that it had previously. The dynasty of the AWA had ended.
I was the AWA World Champion at the time. Kerry Von Erich was the WCCW World Champion, and it was a unification match.
This is the AWA World Heavyweight Championship belt. As far as I'm concerned, this signifies the best in the entire world. Kerry Von Erich has a version that he calls a World Championship from World Class. After Super Clash on December 13th, there will only be one champion. And I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at him right now.
King was in a situation where he was a star of the Memphis territory. And it was important for King to protect his image on this big show because he had to go back to Memphis with his image intact, so to speak, and still be the headliner on his weekly events. Kerry Von Erich had to go back to Dallas and make sure his daddy was happy.
Coming into the Super Clash, he's thinking, am I going to let my family down again? Kerry, you are. You're going to lose. I promise you that.
Man, I'll be honest with you. Nobody knew what was going to happen in that match.
I felt like I was in NATO, or like the UN, and everybody was, in these high-level meetings, and everything was very secret, and everybody was very somber, because these promoters, none of them really trusted each other.
I feel without a doubt that Kerry Von Erich came to Chicago certainly believing that he was going to leave there the unified world champion.
I have such high expectations tonight. I'm planning on taking that title. I've come here for one reason, and that is to show the world that there's only one world champion.
Jerry Jarrett really wanted Lawler to have that championship.
There's so much at stake here. We've been talking about things like this I have for the last 35 years, the getting together of the leagues. And let's see who is the best. Tonight, we're going to find out.
I just felt that, that Vern would not want to see his AWA championship get that big a loss pinned on it and then become a unified title that way.
This is a match where two men are going to walk into the ring, both of them with belts. One man is going to walk out with two belts.
It wound up being probably one of the bloodiest matches that I've ever been involved in.
Lawler taking Von Erich's left arm over the top rope, and he already cut it open.
Yeah, he split it right open. Lawler running his tights after something.
And down goes Von Erich. You're right, Lawler reaching into his tights. Von Erich's busted wide open. Von Erich's cut open. Now he's got it on his forehead. That's where the Iron Claw is most effective.
Jerry Lawler's in a very bad way right now.
But Marty Miller keeps looking at Von Erich's forehead. Lawler going back into his tights. And Lawler hits Von Erich again. Right hand again by Lawler. Out of the ring goes Von Erich. A discus punch by Von Erich. And still Marty Miller wants to check the eye of Kerry Von Erich. These guys are a bloody mess. And there's the Iron Claw again applied by Kerry Von Erich.
Blood was pouring out of his head down into my face. I remember it to this day.
And there's Marty Miller still checking the eye of Kerry Von Erich. Marty Miller calling for the bell.
The referee stops the match. Kerry Von Erich unable to go on. He cannot perform, cannot see. The referee awards the match to Jerry the King Lawler.
The referee did the right thing. He saved the man's eyesight, because if he had not stopped that match, I hate to say it, but I would have blinded Kerry Von Erich, I promise you.
They had a heck of a match, and Lawler retained the title.
The next thing you know, the time goes by and no pay. Then I get a booking sheet from Vern Gagne showing me these dates and these cities I'm supposed to go wrestle in and defend the AWA, or the unified title then. I had the AWA and the WCCW title.
When Lawler was supposed to come back and wrestle our top guys here and would probably lose that title, he didn't show up.
I'm not going and defending the title until I get the payoff from Super Clash.
What else could we do? The AWA, they had to strip him of the title. He wouldn't come up here and wrestle.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
I don't think Lawler's ever been paid yet.
I still had the AWA Championship belt at my home in Memphis. So once I won it at Super Clash, I never went back and worked for Vern Gagne again.
Can you imagine? It's 20 plus years later, or whatever it's been, and he still hasn't been paid.
I think the biggest mistake that Vern Gagne made with Super Clash 3 was the fact that he pretty much alienated himself from all the other promoters when that pay-per-view was over. Quite frankly, he stiffed everybody.
Vern was so far back up against the wall, he decided, I'm going to stick the money in my pocket. Whether that was the case or not, that's what I heard.
Did Vern protect Vern first? Absolutely. But does Vince McMahon protect Vince McMahon first? Does Vince McMahon protect the WWE first and foremost? Absolutely.
To the best of my knowledge, no one was paid anything for Super Clash 3. It basically turned out to be a flop.
Ultimately, it didn't deliver the kind of revenue and the numbers that everybody had hoped it would.
As I recall, they weren't distributed very widely.
It probably did a quarter of the buy rate that WWE was doing at the time, or the NWA was doing at the time.
The wrestlers all knew that the AWA was falling apart at the seams.
And the pay-per-view numbers weren't that bad. But you got to remember, Vince had a pay-per-view going, and Crockett Group had one going, so they sandwiched us right in between them. And Vince was a master at doing that. People spent $39.95 the night before. How are you going to get another $24-25 out of them the next day? He made it very difficult for you to be successful.
It was the first and last attempt to unify all these different independent promoters under one banner.
Politics and ego have been a bigger issue, a bigger detriment to our business, quite frankly, than injuries and money, in my estimation.
After I was officially stripped of the AWA World Championship in Verne Gagne's eyes, without letting me know it, apparently they put together a battle royal of all their remaining talent.
This is the first time in the history of wrestling that they've ever had a battle royal to determine the winner is going to be the world champion, and the reason for that is because they stripped Jerry Lawler of the title.
That's right.
I think that he wasn't showing up in his matches. Maybe he had a big yellow streak down his back with some of the opponents that he had or something.
When the whistle blows, everybody goes, and they sure have, right from the beginning of this match. And it's boiled down to this, fans: Tom Zink and Larry Zbyszko. Vertical bow! Zink's over the top rope.
Right there is your winner over the top rope.
That's it. DeRusha's calling for the bell. The new heavyweight champion of the world, the living legend from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Larry Zbyszko.
What a lot of people don't know, but they did know in that area at the time, was that Larry Zbyszko was Verne Gagne's son-in-law.
I, after 14 glorious years, am the major league of professional wrestling.
Everybody just looked around and said, well, if Verne couldn't make his son world champion, he can make his son-in-law world champion.
I'm a little bit prejudiced. I was hoping my son would win the thing, and he was too.
The fact that Larry married one of Verne's daughters, to me, is totally irrelevant.
What Verne was trying to do, I think, in this instance, was keep the title in the family and not risk that title being, taken to the WWE or to another organization. Just like, I'm sure that Verne looked at me and saying, man, here's this Lawler, this jerk. He wasn't in the AWA. He was from the CWA down in Memphis, and he gets the title, and then, he disappears and he keeps the title. So I just think he felt secure in the fact, heck, this guy's my son-in-law. Where's he going to go?
I'm going to be the kind of champion that a champion should be. Not like the other so-called champions. Not like this goofball coward Lawler.
Larry was a real talented guy, a great talker.
You know what my secret is? I am a product of all the best professional wrestlers that ever were and that ever will be.
I think what Verne saw was maybe again would be the ignition to get them rolling. But again, it's a team effort. And there just wasn't enough depth, quality, main event depth in the AWA at that time for it to survive. And that's what really eventually killed it.
The Team Challenge series on ESPN, that was a little brainstorming idea we came up with where we decided let's have a draft and go into team competition. It's something that nobody else was doing.
They thought that would help save the territory.
Verne just would not throw in the towel. He probably should have a year or two earlier.
And we got a great response from it.
The Team Challenge series. Don't know. What was that?
Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is the finals, the grand finale, if you will, of the Team Challenge Series. It will be a battle royal. Who is ever left, it is so close, will win the Team Challenge Series and the $1 million.
Crank up the VCR because wrestling fans, you are about to see history in the making.
Again, it was at the tail end of the AWA, and I think desperation was running amok.
Well, this is it. This is for all the marbles. This is for the gold. The team's ahead at this point. I'm all mixed up.
You got the Blitzers ahead. I'm sorry, the Blitzers and the Legends are tied at 49 each. The Snipers only 2 points back.
Why can't there's much confusion out there? I can't tell who's going in. Oh, over the top rope!
He's out.
Can you believe it?
Well, that's got to be a point then. With that 1 point, Larry's Legends has tied Barron's Blitzers. We said that there was going to be 5 points to the winner of the match. Unless I'm mistaken, Larry's Legends has just won the Team Challenge Series. Now, what do you think of the Team Challenge Series now?
Well, the Team Challenge here, I think, was a unique thing for professional wrestling. It's the first time it's been done. Anyway, I got to congratulate the other people, but
They were just running out of ideas. They were out of talent. They were out of money. We were losing television stations right and left. I mean, we were literally operating on fumes.
I'll tell you, a lot is going to be written and a lot is going to be said about the Team Challenge Series from 1990.
I don't know who came up with the idea for the Team Challenge Series.
Wrestlers from all over the world are going, where and when is the next one? How can I get a piece of the $1 million?
I don't know why I got stuck with the Team Challenge Series, because I had nothing to do with it.
Well, the guy came up with the idea and then formulated it with my father.
And I think that people just assumed because I was starting to emerge and then this new idea came along that somehow I was responsible for it. But I want to say publicly, on the record, again, nothing to do with that. The final nail, if you will, for AWA came when the state of Minnesota decided to enforce an eminent domain claim against Vern Gagne and the property that Vern had in a very prestigious area of Minneapolis called Lake Minnetonka.
The county came in and decided that, hey, Vern, we'd like to take this piece of property and make a park out of it.
Now, Vern hired a couple attorneys and fought for a couple of years to prevent the sale and try to fight the eminent domain issue. All the while, he was borrowing against that property to fund the AWA. Once he lost the eminent domain case and was forced to sell, he no longer had that asset to borrow against. That hit, that financial hit, is what led Vern to, having no other choice really than to throw in the towel on AWA.
That was really hard on my parents.
Vern would have literally just spent his way into bankruptcy doing everything that he could to keep the AWA alive. He was that stubborn and that committed.
So between the wrestling and that, it was a devastating few years for the Gagne family.
What do you think happened to the AWA?
Please, don't make me answer that.
They ran out of talent. Everybody went to New York.
They put themselves out of business. Vince didn't put them out of business.
If I read one more sour wrestling book from some old wrestler that didn't save his money and is pissed off at everybody because everybody cheated him, everybody did this to him, everything did this, and I'm gonna throw up.
If it wouldn't have been Vince, it would have been someone. Because again, technology-wise, it was all moving in this direction.
I just didn't think that we kept up with the times.
And if you don't change with the times, eventually you're just going to fall on your face.
The stubbornness to not change with the times by Vern was the downfall.
Some may say the reason AWA shut the doors was because Vern was so stubborn. I personally think the reason AWA was around as long as it was because Vern just refused to let it go and really fought to the last, financial breath.
I think he was burned out. Vern was.
He dropped the ball.
I was peed off there for a while, I suppose, but I wanted to keep going. But after the talent went, and you couldn't do anything, you just might as well forget it. I mean, I couldn't make talent fast enough.
They sort of self-destructed, under the weight of competition.
We came to a point where we had nothing. We were going to lose our house.
Vern was not willing to reinvest in his business. The amount of hours that it takes to put into the business, the marketing, all aspects of the business, which you have to have your fingers on. And that would have been foreign to Vern, and he wasn't ready to make that kind of commitment and reinvest monetarily.
I mean, I don't feel bad about it now. I'm not having any grudges for McMahon or anything. His dad and I were good friends, so that was, I remember that, as well as not liking his son.
To close the AWA was a very tough decision for Vern. I mean, his whole life from 1957 to 1991 was AWA. I could have gone to the WWE and supported my family. I chose to stay with my father till the end. And the end came, and it was brutal.
Oh, yeah, it was. I had done pretty well, you know, over the years. So it wasn't that bad for me as it was other people. And it probably hurt a lot of wrestlers also.
God, it was tough, really tough. Emotionally, it was devastating to my mom and dad and to my family.
I wish I could do something that would be sensational. You could put down in those pages you got there, but it's over now. It's over, and that's it. Now forget about it.
When we got the call from John Laurinaitis at the WWE offices that they'd like to induct Vern into the Hall of Fame, I kind of said, "You're kidding."
There was so much animosity, and
Vern, I'm sure, blamed Vince for the demise of the AWA.
He said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, you know, I'm going to have to talk to my father on that one."
I thought, why would they want to do that? I maybe could have said, you know, stick it up, but I'm not holding any grudges, and so.
Wow, I was shocked.
I was very surprised.
I don't recall Vern ever working for the WWE. That kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
I guess I was more shocked, not because Vern wouldn't qualify. Well, it was just because of all the bad blood for all the years.
First of all, I want to congratulate all the inductees tonight. You have some unbelievable talent up here, and we are proud to induct my father, Vern Gagne, into this great Hall of Fame presented by the WWE. Now, 20 years ago, if you'd have told me that, I'd have said you're all out of your minds. And no, we did not join the Vince McMahon Club to be up here today. At this time, I would like to present the 10-time AWA World Heavyweight Champion, my dad, Vern Gagne.
I really don't know what to say on a day like this. The first thing I want to say, though, is about Mr. McMahon, who put this together. Well, I just want to tell you something about it. I never did like the guy either. Well, I'm just overwhelmed, as I said before. A wonderful plaque here. But just the meaning of being put in the Hall of Fame.
I cried. I
had a wonderful experience for about 30, 35 years. It's been great.
Yeah, it was pretty emotional, to be honest with you.
I want to do one thing. I said something maybe a little derogatory about Mr. What's his name again? McMahon. Oh, McMahon. Yes. Anyway, thank you. I thought he put on just the greatest promotion here, and it's a plus for professional wrestling the way he did it. So thank you all.
I was excited because I felt like at this stage in Vern's life, at this time in his life, it was important, and he deserved to have people say thank you.
It was a nice gift to see that Vern finally was, honored for the contribution he made to this business.
I inducted Vern Gagne because he should have been inducted. Vern's contributions to the business are enormous.
Vern Gagne definitely has a place in the history of professional wrestling.
First and foremost, as a competitor in his own right and performer, for that reason he should be in the Hall of Fame.
The Ric Flairs, the Ricky Steamboats, the Sergeant Slaughters, and the list could go on of the men that Vern trained. Vern gave them their opportunity to play in this game. And for that alone, Vern Gagne is a Hall of Famer.
What matters is that the business recognize people like Verne Gagne and recognize their contributions, and that's what the Hall of Fame's all about. It's not about politics.
Verne's AWA is responsible for some of the biggest stars ever.
93 people that he produced or trained.
Everybody in wrestling that was anybody came through the AWA.
Harvey Race.
Blackjack Mulligan, Blackjack Lanza.
Jesse the Body Ventura.
Jim Brunzell.
Ray Stevens.
Bobby Heenan.
Sergeant Slaughter.
Nick Bockwinkel.
Bob Orton Jr.
The Crusher and the Mad Dog.
Ric Flair.
Buddy Rhodes.
Pat Patterson.
The Iron Sheik.
Baron von Raschke.
Larry Hennig.
Kurt Hennig. The Road Warriors.
The greatest star of all time, Hulk Hogan.
My God, doesn't that sound like a list of who's who? The AWA developed some great talent, and you can tip your hat to Verne Gagne for doing that.
I think the legacy of the AWA would be one of extraordinary contributions to the business in general.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to All-Star Wrestling. This is where you see the great one.
A first-class operation in terms of wrestling promotion.
It has been some kind of a night.
They will go down in history as having been a very successful promotion.
This is professional wrestling at its finest.
The AWA should hold its head high. It played a very key role in the long history of professional wrestling.
This was an organization that was built on athletic competition and characters. Nobody did it better than Verne Gagne.
Is this business better off because of the AWA and its contributions? Undoubtedly, that answer is yes.
We enjoyed doing what we did, and I hope they enjoyed watching us.
You guys get back in the ring. Come on, dig.
Great time.
It was a fun period of time for me. I mean, what can I tell you? I was there for 13 years.
It was fun.
If I had another wish, I might want to do that 17 or 18 years all over again.
Will not survive long if you don't learn to get over it.
It'll be a long time before the impact of Verne Gagne is no longer part of this industry.
It was a time and a place that we can never go back to.
God bless Verne Gagne.
I think they said it best at the opening of the program. The major leagues of professional wrestling.